Hi, Billy.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. I'm Ben. I'm the executive director here.
Good to see you, Ben.
You too. I'm also, so I'm the executive director here, but I'm a member at Shari Shemaim in Lancaster. My in-law,
Ah,
My mother and father-in-law were part of the trip that you did.
Oh, we had a great time. That's a great place.
Yeah, they're
Just a special little community there.
you have a lot of fans in that area.
I'm a big fan of theirs. So yeah, I'm going to be talking to them again, I think, at the end of the month.
That's what I heard.
Set up another one. Just checking my calendar there. But we had a great time with them.
Good.
Yep.
Glad to hear it.
Y'all are surviving okay after the storm?
We're doing okay. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I know I had people last night from Long Island who still don't have power.
Yeah. Up in New York, Connecticut, it got pretty bad.
Yeah.
Hopefully soon.
We just got I mean, we are far inland here in Atlanta, and we still got just torrential storm from that last week. So
yeah. No, it hit everywhere up here.
Mhm.
So I'm with you.
All
All
right.
right. I wanted to say hi. I'm gonna mute for a second. I have to run back into a meeting, but
No problem. I
Rabbi
appreciate you
Wahlberg
saying
will be
hi.
here. All right. Thanks.
What did you get, Mom?
Salmon.
Did I get pasta with mine?
It's a potato.
Oh.
Want some spaghetti? You want some spaghetti?
I want some, actually. Wonder why they put potato.
I'm gonna leave and come back in.
Hey, Renata. Good seeing you again. Unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry, second time today. You're right. I was muted. You're right.
Hey, Renata,
Hi.
enjoy.
Oh,
Hey, Ray.
I don't want to be in it. I don't want to be in it.
Bill, how are you? Hey, Marge is back.
Hi.
I'm not gonna hold this. And he may end up
Hey BP, you're all good over there.
Hey, Ezra.
How's it going?
Good, good, good.
Good to see you.
It's good seeing you. What's going on?
You know,
Same
another
old.
day in paradise.
Oh, look who's next to you. At least on my call.
Here.
What's for dinner?
I saw him all day.
What's for dinner in the Androphy home?
Salmon.
Oh, hey, where are you? I didn't know you were on.
Billy, you want to come up?
To your left.
Go down.
Billy, if you come up, we'll feed you.
I don't know if your state will let us in.
That's a good point. I don't know if I'd let you in the house
We're
anyway.
not really welcome north of the Mason-Dixon.
What else is new?
I'm not talking about me personally. I'm talking about my whole state. Yeah, just me personally.
I don't think she can feed the whole state.
What now? I'm sorry.
She can't feed the whole state,
Ah.
just you.
I know, but we're Georgia with our governor. We're not allowed out of the state.
Uh,
We can't come up north. I was going to come up to Massachusetts, and I know we are banned.
Billy, you've got an Atlanta contingent on the call.
I
tonight.
see you over there.
Hi there. It's so good to see you.
Good to see you too.
I'm excited about tonight.
I can't believe we have to be on a call with the Philadelphia Synagogue to see each other across town.
Right.
Great.
Billy, do you know Judy Barkin, who's also on tonight? Also,
I'm not sure.
Michelle Rich's sister.
I'm sorry. Who?
I am Michelle Rich's sister.
Oh, sure.
We met years ago. Nice
Yes.
to see you.
It's good to see you too. How's Michelle surviving being in home
Yeah.
all the time? She's doing all right?
She's doing okay. Yeah,
Okay.
she sends her regards.
All right. I'll have to reach out to her.
How's Debbie doing?
She's doing well. She's busy. She's working in the this new hybrid Jewish after school program that now, because of the virus and all, they're doing all day programming.
Wow.
Barbara.
She's excited.
Doing well.
Barbara Newman. Hi.
I will tell her I saw you.
Muted.
Please.
Oh, hi. How you doing?
Good.
Yeah,
all
good
right,
to
well,
see
before
you.
this becomes
Yeah,
a-
you too.
Yeah.
This becomes
How
a
we
social
do?
hour with everybody talking to everybody else, which I know we'd also like to do, but maybe we'll save that for the end. I wanted to welcome all of you this evening to our program. Of course, we had to delay a week because of the power outage last week. I don't know if there were others who had intended to join us. The new schedule just didn't work out for them, but we do have a sizable contingent on right now, and I think it's going to grow. I am delighted that you are with us for a very important discussion. As we well know, in addition to our country and our world dealing with a pandemic, which has turned so many lives and businesses and organizations, institutions upside down, there has been unrest in our country as a result of the killings of Black men and women, some at the hands of vigilantes, others at the hands of police. And one after another, these issues have led to protests and riots, demonstrations, and rallies, not just Blacks, but people from across the spectrum who recognize that there is a lot more that we in this country need to do to improve conditions for Blacks in this country and for them to be given a fair and equal shake within this great nation of ours. And at the same time, we're also finding that there are these unfortunate incidents of Black versus Jew, Jews versus Black, some really horrible things that Black personalities in Philadelphia, outside of Philadelphia, have said, have posted. I think it began with Deshaun Jackson, a famous Philadelphia Eagle, who posted something that he absolutely should not have. And the response was quick and I think somewhat effective. And hopefully he has seen the error of his ways. We're hoping that the same will be true for Rodney Muhammad, the leader of the Philadelphia NAACP, although he doesn't seem to be coming around. And there's still concern about whether the supporters in the NAACP have properly understood just how horrific were the postings that he is responsible for. So in light of all these discussions that are taking place, I want to draw your attention to a wonderful column in the most recent edition of the Jewish Exponent by Bert Siegel, who for many years was the head of the JCRC, the Jewish Community Relations Council here in Philadelphia. And he talks about the wonderful work that the JCRC was involved in with the Black Jewish Coalition that they helped to found here with the Black clergy of Philadelphia, and a number of bright moments in Philadelphia history between the Black community and the Jewish community. Where we stand now is a little bit shaker, I would say. And so we need to both educate ourselves and become voices for a stronger bit of cooperation between the two communities and hopefully a healing of some of the hurt that has been done. So with all of this in mind, we have Billy Planer to come address us tonight on this very important topic. So I want to introduce Billy to you. Who is Billy Planer? Well, he's worked with Jewish experiential education for over 35 years. He received his bachelor's degree in advertising and psychology from Syracuse University and a master's in education and counseling from Georgia State University. He originally from Atlanta, Georgia. He worked as a counselor and division head at Camp Ramah in New England, and as a synagogue youth director at Beth Shalom in Syracuse, New York, Addis Israel Congregation in Washington, D.C., Bethel in Highland Park, and Avat Achim in Atlanta, Georgia. In 1995, Billy created a weekend trip for his youth group in which they explored a city's history and culture. The first trip was to Washington, D.C., and in subsequent years, he took groups to Memphis, Boston, Chicago, and New York. And every trip included a mix of Judaism, American history, politics, music, and culture. And on a challenge from a friend in the summer of 2001, Billy took a video camera with him to interview people on his annual personal road trip around parts of the U.S. And halfway through, Billy realized that instead of filming all of this, he should be bringing teens to historical spots to meet with people who help create history and who are involved in changing the world. Etgar 36, that is his venture. This was born on September 11th, 2002. And it is a summer journey that has taken Jewish teens on a bus across America in which they find their voice and power while being exposed to all sides of political issues and learning about the history that shapes us in the places where remarkable events have occurred. All of this results in young people becoming empowered and inspired to get involved and develop their American identities as well as their Jewish identities. In addition to summer travel programs, ECAR 36 now runs shorter academic year trips focused on the civil rights movement in the South. Since that first trip in 2003, over 23,000 people have been on one of Billy's ECAR 36 journeys. It's quite remarkable. This includes day schools, youth, adult, and family groups from synagogues, as well as interreligious and interracial groups. All of that being a part of Billy's background, he is very, very qualified to speak with us tonight on the issue of Black-Jewish relations from the Civil Rights era and today. Billy, glad to have you with us.
All right. Thank you, Adam. That sounded good. I want to meet that guy who you introduced there. And there's so many connections while you're reading that biography. Of course, your parents, I was about to say over in the bottom left corner, but I don't know where they are on people's screens. Your father was my first boss ever out of college. And I learned my trade there at his synagogue. And of course, one of your board members, Ezra Androfi, was my first employee. That's when I knew I had to really do well with this work thing. It became serious when Ezra came on board. And also, the first trip I ever did with the synagogue group was to DC, but we also came up to Philadelphia for a day. So I have a special place in my heart for your city. I like Philadelphia a lot, but I appreciate you having me here, and I appreciate that we could make this work when the storm came through. So it's great to see everybody here. And so I'm just going to start up. This is, I'm often reminded that, you know, one of the big names that we know from the civil rights era, one of the big Jewish names is Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And he wrote in the early 60s a telegram to President Kennedy. And he said to President Kennedy, and this is the vernacular of the time, he said, we have to do something about the Negro problem. We need a Marshall Plan for the Negro problem in America, and this time calls for moral grandeur and spiritual audacity. And there's not a lot of times, I think, that a person knows when they are in the middle of a time that is A, revolutionary, and B, calls for moral grandeur and spiritual audacity. And I venture to say, I think we're in one of those times right now. So it's so great to meet with y'all, to talk to you. And as Adam said, usually I'm running about 50 to 55 of these civil rights trips a year. And March 8th, we shut down completely. So it's wonderful to be able to talk about these issues instead of just being home. So let's start up. And two of the really overall tension points that we're going to talk about here is, first of all, we like the Jewish community, we like to tell the story that we were heavily involved in the civil rights movement. The reality is yes, and the reality is no. There are 4 living Jews right now in Selma, Alabama. Back in the civil rights era, there were 300. Right now, there are 4. The youngest is 66 years old. And as he will tell you, there were Jews on both sides of the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday. So, you know, we're going to talk about why and how did Jews end up on both sides, because we like to tell the story too. And I get asked by adults all the time on my civil rights trip, why is the Black and Jewish community not together like we were in the civil rights era? And the reality is we were never as close as we like to think we were as we tell the story. So I want to just jump in and start talking about that, and then we'll bring it to some modern times and modern issues, because they do go hand in hand. And then we'll just open it up for questions and discussions. And growing up working with teenagers, I am fine if you push back on me and disagree with me and tell me I'm wrong. I'm used to it. So the other thing I want to do is make sure that when I'm going to talk about the Jewish community right now, you know, as I was growing up and as I was starting my work, you pretty much thought that the Jewish community was monolithically white. You just talked about it that way. In 2020, it is now time to talk about the fact that there is a number of Jews of color, and they come with unique talents, but also unique issues in being Jewish and of color. But for this talk, I just want to make it clear that when I say the Jewish community, I'm really talking about white Jews at this moment. So the overall tension points are right now is in the Jewish community, are we white or are we Jewish? And how much do we blend in to society? This has always been an American Jewish problem right now, is how much assimilation do we have? And so to really understand the Southern Jewish experience, we have to go back to the late 1800s. And there were 2 major waves of Jewish immigration into the South, and mainly Atlanta, which I'm a native of. The first wave were your German Jews, and they were your classic Reformed Jews. They wanted to do nothing but blend. If you've seen Driving Miss Daisy, this is Driving Miss Daisy. They would have Christmas trees in their house. Their Shabbat services would be on Sunday. They wanted to be Southern and happened to have this thing called Jewish, but that they weren't going to let that stop them from assimilating into the local community. But then came your Eastern European Jews. And they embarrassed the German Jews because they looked different, they ate different, they kept kosher, they prayed different. And so you had that tension going on. And then, all right, I am going to try this, and Ezra, don't laugh at me, but I am going to get technical, and I've got some pictures to show y'all. All right. Are you seeing a picture right now? Yes, no, maybe?
No, no.
Okay. All right, it's not going to work, so let me get out of this.
Didn't see a picture for a second.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to tell the story, and the guy who works for me tomorrow is going to show me once again for like the fourth time how to do this. But Ezra, I wish you were here. But anyway, in 1913 Atlanta, we had a major incident happen that really helped define the Southern Jewish experience. And that is, there was a, from German Jewish descent, a New Yorker who moved down here. And if you were into the white power establishment, Southern power establishment, if you were Jewish, you were from New York. And if you were in New York, you were a Jew. And they didn't like you for either one of them. Didn't matter if technically you weren't Jewish, but you were a New Yorker, which was equally bad to the Southern eyes. And his name was Leo Frank. And Leo Frank married into a prominent Southern family named the Seeligs, still today a prominent family. And Leo Frank ended up running their business, the pencil factory, one of their businesses. And on a Saturday afternoon, a young girl, 13 years old, white girl from Cobb County, which is right above Atlanta, came to get her pay. She worked in the pencil factory. And this is before child labor laws. And her body is found in a coal shaft later that day, murdered. Now, 1913 Atlanta, what do you think the suspect first looked like that they first suspected? Of course, a black man. And his name was Jim Conley. And he was a custodian in the pencil factory. He worked in the pencil factory. And it wasn't just racism that made them think it was Jim Conley. He had on a bloody shirt when they found him. And there was a murder note by the body. And when they read the murder note to Jim Conley, it was in the same handwriting and he made the same spelling mistakes. And so this is where it gets a little crazy. Our state general attorney at the time, Hugh Dorsey, looked at Jim Conley and said, as a black man, I don't think you are smart enough to have pulled off this murder. So tell us who did it. And Jim Conley changed the story a little bit, still indicting himself. And Hugh Dorsey's like, you got to do better than that. I know this isn't the story. So Jim Conley then comes back with a story that says, I was walking by the coal shaft and my boss, Leo Frank, called me in to help move a body that he murdered. And so I carried the body out, and that's why there's blood on my shirt. And he made me write out the murder note. And that's why it's in my handwriting and the spelling mistakes. And Hugh Dorsey goes, that's the story I can go with. And so Leo Frank, they go to Leo Frank. The sheriff goes to Leo Frank's house late at night. And Leo Frank says to the sheriff, this is 1913 Atlanta, I don't want to talk to you until I talk to my lawyer. Well, that's known as getting uppity down here. And you don't do that. So Leo Frank is thrown into jail, tried in downtown Atlanta in the middle of the summer. They didn't have air conditioning. They would open up the courtroom windows. They were on the ground floor. People were able to stick their head in the window and yell out, the Jew did it, kill the Jew. It should not shock you. Leo Frank is found guilty and sentenced to death for the murder of Mary Fagan. Now, at this point, two organizations are created. Up in Chicago, there are a bunch of Jewish lawyers getting together and realizing as part of this case, there is anti-Semitism sweeping America at this point, and they formed the ADL. Right after that, a hero of the movement, and I'll talk about the second group in just a second, a hero of the movement steps in, our governor, John Slayton. John Slayton, at the end of his governorship, says, you know, I've studied this Leo Frank trial, and I don't know whether Leo Frank is innocent or not, but what I do know is that this has been a travesty of justice, and therefore I'm going to commute the sentence from death to life in prison. And our governor then goes home, packs his bags, and leaves the state of Georgia for 20 years because the locals start rioting. They start hanging the governor in effigy. there's a picture well, I could show you, but there was a picture of a dummy of our governor, John Slayton, hanging from a lamppost or a telephone pole. And it says on a sign beneath it, it says, "Here's John Slayton, Prince of the Jews." And so there's all this rage going on. And at the time, Leo Frank is now just going to die in prison. He's not going to be killed for the murder of Mary Fagan. So some white men we have an area in Atlanta called Stone Mountain, right outside of Atlanta. It's a large exposed piece of granite. People climb it today. There are laser shows, gatherings, families go there. And a bunch of white men go to the top of Stone Mountain, put a cross in the ground, light it on fire, and they resurrect the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan had been pretty dormant, but because of this case, they wanted to bring it back to life. And they call themselves the Knights of Mary Fagan, and they're going to exact revenge. So they go down to Milledgeville, which now with a highway is about 30 minutes from Atlanta. Leo Frank is being held in prison there because while in jail, his neck is slit open, unrelated to all this. So it's a hospital prison. And these men go to the warden, the prison guards, and say, "We want Leo Frank." This kind of mob mentality you're going to hear over and over again. But they said, "Go have him. Do what you want to do." They take Leo Frank out of the prison, put him in the back of the car, and their goal is to make it all the way to Marietta, to where Mary Fagan is from. But there are a couple things that happen. One is the sun starts to come up. And back then, the Klan, not as bold as they are now, do not like to do anything out in the open where they can be seen. And the driver, while driving, hears Leo Frank professing his innocence to the driver's friends in the back of the car, and they are starting to believe him. So he quickly pulls off into a farm, tells the farmer who they've got. The farmer said, "Do what you want to do." They take Leo Frank out of the car, and they take him to a tree, and they say, "Do you have any wishes?" He takes off his wedding ring, says, "Can you please get this to my wife? We sent her to New York during the trial because it was so unsafe here." They, being upstanding, good Southern gentlemen, do that. And I'm being sarcastic here because just a couple moments later, they lynch Leo Frank. And there are 400 documented lynchings at the time in Georgia. 399 are black. One is a white guy, and it's Leo Frank. And this sends shockwaves through the Jewish community because all of a sudden, the Jews realize that just because of the color of our skin, we may have a 5-minute head start over the black community. That we are just one rung above the black community in the totem pole of hate. We do not blend here. And so, you know, also what's happening is if you ever see pictures of the lynching of Leo Frank, you will see people are hanging out all around the site. These lynchings, black or Leo Frank, become social events. People were all there proudly taking pictures of themselves next to the body. People cut him down, cut off parts of his clothes, sold that, and sold the rope that was lynched Leo Frank to people. People had it in their house. They were very proud of these events. And the same happened within the black community. Fast forward to the 50s, and we have a major reform temple in Atlanta, not a huge creative naming committee of the synagogue because it is called the Temple. And they had a Rabbi Rothschild, who is outspoken on behalf of civil rights and working with Dr. King. And if you've seen Driving Miss Daisy, you'll know this scene. The temple is bombed because of the work that the synagogue and the rabbi were doing on behalf of civil rights. The rabbi's wife, who's still alive today, calls it the bomb that healed because many aspects of the community came together. There are famous pictures of the mayor, Mayor Hartsfield. If you ever flown into Atlanta, it's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. The mayor came out. The editor, Ralph McGill of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, wrote scathing editorials about the bombers. Now, I want to point out, that's great. The community showed up for us, but black churches were being bombed in silence all the time right now. The community was ignoring these. So already you're starting to see some breaks here, and a lot of it is because we're white. You know, others can relate to us easier than they can the black community. And so these two events are really going on, and this is what leads us up to the post-World War II group. And part of what to understand is with the post-World War II group, their parents, many may be first-generation Americans coming over from Europe, coming over to this country. And of course, if you're coming through Ellis Island at the time, you're going to get shtetlized basically in America because you've got to go find family or friends that you can live with in the tenements that may give you a job and a reason you can be here. And so we first start off being shtetled in America, but also trying to blend in America, but we're amongst our people. And then we start to hit the post-World War II boom prosperity. And we do what the white community does. We leave the inner cities and go out to the suburbs. And Levittown, New York, one of the first planned communities in America, we go out to the suburbs. And the kids of these people who are making it in America, who are just pursuing the American dream, these kids are the baby boom generation, and they're very comfortable being white. And they also want to escape this Jewish identity, which is really tied into just the previous decade of the Holocaust. Part of our major part of the identity is the Holocaust. But these Jewish teens, like regular teens, just want to be cool and hip. And so what is cool and hip in the culture of the time? Black culture. It is forbidden. It is scary. It is edgy. Your parents didn't like it, which means you really went for it. And what's coming out of that culture is really a lot of music. You got jazz, blues, and even 1955 from a young boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, who then goes to Memphis and really hits it big, Elvis Presley. And all Elvis did was cover black music. If you're really getting into Elvis, you're going to quickly realize he did nothing original. He just covered black musicians. And if you are a white teenager in 1955, I just want to talk about the power of culture and specifically music. And you are being taught that the black teenager is the other, the less than, the not to be dealt with, but you like this music. You're not going to find it out in Elkins Park. You're not going to find it out in the suburbs. You're going to have to go back into the inner city to find what are called race records. So we have to explain to teenagers today what a record store is, but you're going to go into the record store. And if you are listening to an album of this black music and you realize that the teenager next to you, the black teenager next to you is listening to the same music, all of a sudden you've got a connection. All of a sudden you can talk about this culture, this music. You can talk about the fact your parents both your parents hate this music, which means y'all love it. And all of a sudden you have a connection. That black teenager then goes from the other to another teenager with the same struggles as you. And you start to bridge that gap. And so this is how we start to get towards the civil rights movement. But the American Jewish tension is of being allowed in. We are allowed in because we are white, and we are also financially making it. But we always like to tell the story that we pulled ourselves up from our bootstraps. That's the ultimate American story. But in the black community, they can't tell that story, because I've heard the quote here, you can't say you can't pull yourself up from your bootstraps if you can't afford the boots. So once again, we have some entrance into these areas. I'm not at all saying that our entrance was easy, but the reality is the color of our skin opened up a lot more doors and a lot more access than if our skin was dark. And so the saying about American Jewry at the time is universalism is the particularism of American Jews, in that what is very particular about us is that we look broad. We include and help many different people, mostly in our DNA, because we know what it's like to be kicked out of other countries. So we have got to get along with people. But also, especially if you're a Southern Jew, you don't want to necessarily stand out too much. So you're going to blend in, but you're going to help with your own problems by taking care of everybody's problems. So the saying, and it's sort of like what Blanche Dubois says in Streetcar Named Desire, Jews have always been dependent upon the kindness of strangers. So we're going to pay it forward. And the saying was that universalism is the particularism of American Jews. And that brings us into the 60s. And like I said, you have Jews on both sides of the civil rights battle. And so I want to take both sides. So first, we're going to talk about why were there Jews on the white power establishment side, on the side of the Edmund Pettus Bridge that was stopping the march. One of the sociological things that happens is if you are coming over, if you escape Nazi Europe or anywhere in the world that's mistreating you as a Jew, you come to America, for most part, you're going to do well. Like America's going to treat you okay. You're going to have the ability to make it in America. America is one of the countries, one of the only countries that's kept its promise to our people that we can thrive and survive here. And so if you are a young person growing up at this point, you're hearing your parents talk about America with terms of like the Golden Medina and just how great America is. And a lot of your parents are a little offended that there are people who are criticizing America or think that America needs to change. One of these people, just to go anecdotal and talk about somebody, is a young man named Saul Tepper, whose father escapes Nazi Austria and makes it to Selma, Alabama, and becomes a merchant in Selma. To this day, if you cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge into downtown Selma, you'll see one of the first things on your left is a big building that says Tepper's. It was a department store. Saul Tepper grew up hearing his father get very angry and frustrated by the Black community saying we need to change America. And so Saul Tepper actually becomes the right-hand man of Sheriff Jim Clark. Sheriff Jim Clark runs Selma. Bull Connor in Birmingham just had a better PR agent. He got all of the, I won't say credit, it's not the right term for what Bull Connor got, but Bull Connor got on all the news for the hoses and the dogs. Jim Clark in Selma was equally insidious on keeping Blacks from registering to vote and voting, and equally violent. And Saul Tepper was his right-hand man because, you know, think about it for a second also. If you are being bullied, it all goes back to the 5th grade recess field, if you think about it. If you are being bullied, of course we would like to say you stand up to the bully. But realistically, there are two major things that happen. One is you stay very quiet and hope the bully does not see you and is busy picking on other people. Or number two, you might join in hoping that the bully never turns on you, that you're going to be on the side of the bully. And that's sort of what Saul Tepper did here. And Saul Tepper, so much so that how the march in Selma happens is there's a young Black man named Jimmy Lee Jackson who is at a voter registration meeting. And when they come walking out, the Black community comes walking out, they're confronted by the police department. And he sees a police officer pull up his billy club to hit his 82-year-old grandfather. And Jimmy Lee Jackson grabs the arm of the officer, something you don't do. This is 1965, something you don't do in 1965 Selma. And he gets shot and he dies 8 days later. Now, the movement, the civil rights movement has already been in Selma because of Jim Clark. And there are two women, Amelia Boynton Robinson and Marie Foster, who are doing the registering of voters, doing the pushback against Jim Clark. They organized the march in Jimmy Lee Jackson's honor, that then the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, headed by our recently lost Congressman John Lewis and Hosea Williams. These are 21-year-old students. They pick up the mantle to lead the march. Dr. King tells them, don't do the march on that Sunday. Well, if you're 21 years old and the old man tells you not to do it, what are you doing? You're doing it. But I want to point out, the old man, Dr. King, is all of 35 years old at the time. But John Lewis and Hosea Williams start the march. Now, Dr. King did not want the march to happen for two reasons. One, he couldn't be there. He was busy in Atlanta that day. Number two, if you've ever been between Montgomery and Selma, you'll discover, you know, there's nothing there. There's nothing between the two. And they didn't have a permit to march. Dr. King knew if they made it past that bridge, they could be murdered in the backwoods of Alabama and never seen again. But the march goes across the bridge, and of course, they are beaten Bloody Sunday. The press breaks into the movie of the week that night to show the footage of the beatings on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Here's a good trivia question for your next party you're at. The movie of the week that they break into to show the footage is Judgment at Nuremberg. And so they're showing the beatings, and there's a reverend and a Universalist Unitarian minister named James Reeb in Boston, white man. He sees the footage and goes immediately to the airport to get to Selma. In fact, he gets to Selma before Dr. King gets to Selma and does a call out to clergy. James Reeb is there. He participates in their next march on that next Tuesday, where they just pray in front of the police officers and then turn around and go back to the church. But James Reeb then goes to an integrated diner for dinner. And his goal after the diner is to walk back to the church where all the meetings happen. But he, not knowing the lay of the land and being secure in his white skin, goes the short route, which takes him in front of a Klan diner. And the Klan, they don't like black people. They don't like Jews. What they really don't like also is Northerners who came down to tell them what to do about black people and Jews. So there's a couple people that come out and start beating on James Reeb and the two other ministers he's with. James Reeb gets hit in the back of the head. The locals know that he's in trouble. They can't take him to the hospital. The local hospital will not take him in because he is working on behalf of the civil rights movement. Now, I'm not a doctor, but I've been told if you have a concussion, at the very beginning, actually, you're functioning rather well. So he's talking, he's walking around, but they realize he needs a neurosurgeon and they need to get him to Birmingham. So they put him in the back of an ambulance and take him to Birmingham, and he dies in Birmingham. The local white power establishment in Selma needs a narrative that does not make them look bad and helps them deal with their actions. And Saul Tepper comes up with it. He says, we're going to tell them that the movement killed, the civil rights movement killed James Reeb in the back of the ambulance because the movement needed a white martyr to enrage the white North. So Saul Tepper is really an example of some of the Jews who are complicit on the side of the white power establishment there. But also in the inner cities, and this applies to the North too, many of the slumlords were Jewish, and many of the store owners were Jewish. Now, part of the store owners who were Jewish would be the ones who hired black people, but some of them mistreated their black clientele that Dr. King wrote about and others wrote about as well. And so there's a riff already. You can see a riff already that we were not arm in arm completely with the black community. Now let's talk about those that were on the civil rights side of the bridge, on the marchers side of the bridge. Now remember, we're talking about 63, 64, 65. Selma, all that happens in 1965. And so these white civil rights workers on the cusp of the counterculture, and as young people, they're denouncing their parents' strive for materialism and materialistic ease in America out in the suburbs. They are denouncing the new wealth, and they realize too, because they're the best educated population that America's ever seen, that things are not great for everybody here. It's great for white people especially, but we should help take care of everybody. Now, two of the major social workers that we see, and by the way, the studies and statistics are that of the white people who came down from the North to get involved, 60% were Jewish. So we did have a heavy number. But the interesting thing is, if you talk to them back in the day, not all of them would tell you they were doing it as Jews or because they were Jewish. They viewed themselves, and it goes back to that saying, as universalists. They were rejecting the Judaism of their parents. They wanted to be more of this ideal utopic community, world global community. And they would tell you that they were doing it out of being universalists, and they would take care of the anti-Semitism or Jewish issues, but they would take care of everybody. And within that, they would take care of Jewish issues. And they were comfortable to criticize America. And two of the main ones we know, Andrew Goodman and Mickey Schwerner, come down in summer of 1964 for Freedom Summer. And they, with a local black man in Philadelphia, Mississippi, actually, go to look at, his name is James Chaney, and they go to investigate a church that had been firebombed because they were having voter registration there. And on the way back, they get pulled over the side of the road by Klansmen, and they disappear. And the missing poster for them goes viral. Well, it doesn't go viral then, but today we would call it, it goes viral. It goes nationwide. And their bodies are found murdered a month later. And this outrages the white North and the Jewish white North because they could see themselves in those two boys, Andrew Goodman and Mickey Schwerner. But neither one, when interviewed, or Mickey Schwerner's wife after the funeral, would say that they did it because they were Jewish. They were doing it more because they were Universalists. And by the way, you see this later in the counterculture. Allen Ginsberg, the Jewish poet who wrote Howl, changed poetry. Abby Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, all leaders of the counterculture. They also didn't claim their Judaism so much there. They were much more involved in this idea of universalism going on here. But how does this start to shift is in the late 60s, you have the Black Power movement comes to fruition. And everybody, like today on the streets in American cities, is following the lead of the Black community in what to do. And so if you have the Black Power movement coming up, and they are starting to talk about this back to Africa, and identity politics is really what they're doing, saying Black is beautiful, I'm Black and I'm proud, the back to Africa movement, all of a sudden everybody else is like, well, we can get into identity politics. So these young Jewish kids, all of a sudden this coincides with becoming Zionistic because you have the Six-Day War happening. 1967, the Six-Day War happens, but also the beginnings of the Free Soviet Jewry movement, which takes many of its strategies and tools from the civil rights movement. And so that is really the two different sides, I'll just keep using this analogy, of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, of how Jews found themselves on both sides of those bridges. So in reality, we were never as tight. Now, many of my reverends and civil rights workers who speak to my groups get asked all the time, did you know Rabbi Heschel? Did you know Jewish people? And they will answer, and it's not heard so well with teenagers today in their political correctness, and it's probably a good thing. These people would answer, the reverends and workers would answer, of the Jews, they were our money and our lawyers. Now, teenagers will then turn and say, that's so stereotyping us. But the reality is that was the truth. They were getting money because movements need money. Dr. King was not making money just giving speeches and working on poverty issues. And if you were a Black person in the 50s and 60s in the South going to jail, you weren't messing around. You needed to get out of jail. And so really our huge contribution was the money and the legal work to get the things happening. And even today, if you look today on the college campuses, when there are students on the college campus, but when you have the tension of the Israel and Palestinian issues, not many of the Jewish kids on the left are identifying solely as Jewish. They're looking at it much more as a universalist idea and organizing that way. And so it's still alive and well today. I'm going to stop there before I get to what is going on today. Adam, if we have any questions or comments there, or we can get into what's going on today and then open it up as well.
Well, let's see if we have any questions at this point. If you would be kind enough to raise your hand or submit something in the chat function. I'm looking at the screens with live people who could raise their hands, and also
feel free to push
the chat.
Okay. Well, then we can also move into today, which will probably bring up some comments and
we have a hand raised. Ken Moskowitz.
All right.
Just two questions on history.
Sure.
One, the beginning of the NAACP, and two, the Rosenwald schools, because you started in the 50s and these go back.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you could go way back. I just had to find a spot. But of course, both of them that you pick up on are Jewish people. The NAACP was really started there by Jews. Some Jews helped start the NAACP. And the Rosenwald schools were schools for the Black community in poor rural areas throughout the South, something like 500 of them. He was connected, I do believe, with the Sears and Roebuck.
5,000.
How many?
5,000.
5,000 schools. Okay.
20% of the population, of the Black population.
Went into a school there.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, so we definitely have had hands in social movements and in working on equality through the country. But yeah, so those two are fine examples of what was going on there as well.
But they didn't bind the two communities. That's where I'm going. Or why did they not bind the two communities before we got to the 50s?
Well, so why were we not so together at that point leading up
Yes.
to the 60s? Is that what you're asking?
Yes,
I mean,
because of those two.
I think you do have to pay credence to the fact that slumlords, many slumlords in the inner cities were Jewish. And also you just, before that, Jews also were not standing out so much before 1950 here. You know, we had the huge wave coming in with Europe and really trying to figure our identity and our place here. We really rise to prominence with the post-World War II generation, the post-World War II economic boom coming in. But we also, you know, because we were allowed into certain occupations, you know, the stereotype of why do Jews run Hollywood? Well, it's sort of true because at the time in the 20s and 30s, movie making was considered second class. It was low class, low rent occupation. So they allowed us to go in there. And that's, you know, then we elevated. We were not allowed into all the occupations, I mean. So, you know, we definitely were able to pull ourselves up there, but also, and, you know, we'll talk about this when we talk about today, you do have two communities, they're the Black and Jewish community, that come into this country. We come in through Europe, you know, and what's happening in Europe. And then you also have the Black community coming up post-Reconstruction into the Jim Crow era. And you see one community starting to make it. I mean, we internally, there is a reason why we are able to organize ourselves and fund our own community. I just don't think we can look past the fact that our whiteness allowed us access to parts of society that Black people did not get access to. Granted, we did, and I have this conversation with my parents all the time, who are just post-Holocaust generation, who want to know, like my mom's parents came over and she would often ask, how come the Black community couldn't pull themselves up like we could? And you can't dismiss systemic racism even back then that kept people who had darker skin than us out and let us through for a while. So all of that is really parts of it. And there's a lot of tension. And as somebody said, you know, there is people in the middle of the bridge. There, you know, we had people on both sides here, and the civil rights, the movement, the protest, and the riots, you know, all of them did divide this country, and divided the Jews too, because this young man in Selma, well, he's not young now, but the 66-year-old Jew in Selma, the youngest Jew in Selma is what I was trying to say, will tell you when asked about, well, 1965 in Selma, he was 14 years old. He goes, it wasn't that bad for the Black community. And I'm thinking, to you, it didn't seem that bad to them, but he didn't live downtown. And what he was concerned about is what he heard his parents talking about, the concern for their business, you know, whether or not it would survive the riots, instead of talking about what should happen. And we're seeing this today too, by the way. So all of that is happening. It's a very complicated story with a lot of different entrance and exit ramps for people to come in on. But you do bring up, you know, when those of us who were involved there were some of us who were very involved. And so starting the NAACP, sure. All of that is there. There are other questions, or that's a segue into?
I think you could continue.
Yeah. All right. So at this point, I do want to say some of this is just opinions of mine, which are as valid as yours. So please feel free, but I just want to post some ideas here. And the reality of what's happening today on the streets, the movement for Black Lives, the protests that are going on. And let me just claim the language for a second. I do separate two things: protests versus riots happening on the streets. I think what was happening in Chicago last night is rioting. I think when you're standing around marching with signs, chanting, that's protesting. I do think there are two different things happening on the streets. In Atlanta, we knew in the afternoon you were protesting. At night became some of the tension and the riots here. So the civil rights movement's not our story. We were participants in somebody else's story. Just like today, we are participants in somebody else's struggle right now. And it's not really an oppression Olympics. I hear many of our people, and many of our people would talk to, when we do these trips, we have a woman who was 11 years old, a Black woman who was 11 years old when she was beaten on the bridge in Selma, Alabama. And she's talking about her story, and she will talk about why Black Lives Matter versus all lives matter. And then, and inevitably, when I have Jewish groups, somebody will bring up, well, we understand, the Holocaust, and bring up the Holocaust. And she'll look at them and say, this is not an oppression Olympics. You are white. People don't have to tell your children that their life matters. Her kids and her grandchildren need to be told. She said, ideally, we will get to a point in this country where all of our lives matter. But right now, certain people's matter more than others. And so playing the Holocaust versus the Jim Crow era, it's an oppression Olympics here. But I also want to point out this, and I appreciate the bringing up of the schools and the NAACP, because if we want to know where the world was in the 30s in Europe, or after the shootings in Pittsburgh, or after the shootings in San Diego, then we must show up when it's not us. Hate does not discriminate. If it's not us, it's going to be Muslims, it's going to be Black people, it's going to be LGBT community, it's somebody. So, but hate does not discriminate. It's going to go around. So all the more to show up when it's somebody else, to try and prevent it in our own backyard. And I'd like to say, I think we are showing up because of that. The Black Lives Matter versus all lives matter. I was speaking to a modern Orthodox rabbi friend of mine, and I said, I had heard this parable, and I've been told that I might not have it exactly right, but there is this idea in the New Testament that Jesus had a flock of 100 sheep. And he told his disciples, 99 of them are fine. Take them. I'm going to work with this one. I'm going to be with this one that's sick. And a lot of reverends and ministers have taken on this idea that there are people who are more vulnerable in our communities than others at certain times. And therefore, that's what we learn from that teaching. And I asked the rabbi, I was like, is there a Jewish equivalent to this idea? And he said, yeah, there is one that is so basic that we often look past it, is that our golden rule idea is love your neighbor as yourself. He said, but in the Torah, then it also talks about the orphan and the widow and the sick. And rabbis will say, there's no, every word in the Torah is there for a reason. There's no extra words there. So why, when you're saying love your neighbor as yourself, would you then include other people? Isn't that everybody? And this rabbinic friend of mine said, it's because, there are certain people, just the same thing, who are more vulnerable at certain times in their life. And we should pay extra attention to them. And right now we would, as Rabbi Wolberg said, the younger Rabbi Wolberg said at the time in the introduction, that right now we are experiencing a community that is definitely on the front lines of human rights issues. And we are seeing Black men and women being shot down in our streets. And so perhaps right now it takes special attention here. And then I want to say two more things, and then please, I'll open it up. So the idea of Black Lives Matter and anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, and the BDS movement here. You can't talk about this without addressing this issue because it's out there. And that is this. How did Black Lives Matter get lined up with Palestinians is when the rioting and protesting in outside of St. Louis started up. They were being, the people protesting were being tear gassed in Ferguson. And they got texts from Palestinians saying, we see you on the news. This is how you deal with tear gas. We've been tear gassed. Sadly, at the time, many of the Jewish community in St. Louis's response was to retreat back to the suburban homes. There was a Reformed temple in down St. Louis that did open its doors and bring in the people from the streets, and that's fantastic. I think had we shown up during all of this, instead of possibly just going back home, we could have had a better sense, a better say in the relationship. And if we are seeing anti-Semitism on the streets, this is just my opinion, I'm going to put out there, all the more reason to be out there. Because if we are out there with them at their time of need, it's so much easier than to turn to them and say, hey, you know, we were right there with you. Could we talk now about anti-Semitism? Could we talk about your platform in Black Lives Matter? And by the way, there is a distinction between Black Lives Matter as an organization and what's happening. I'm pointing, downtown Atlanta is right over there. You can't see it, but I keep saying the streets that way. And what's happening in the streets of downtowns in the cities. That's really more a movement for Black lives. But I want to go back to somebody, I think it was the rabbi who talked about the athletes, and this sums it up, is what I love is the answer of the Jewish athlete of the New England Patriots, who did an amazing thing. He got everybody outside of Boston to actually like a New England Patriot for a moment there. But his answer to, who was the Philadelphia player? What was his name?
Deshaun Jackson.
Yeah. Your player. I'm a Minnesota Vikings fan, so y'all beat us pretty bad last time we were around. But his answer is the player from New England, last name Edelman, so brilliant. He wrote to your player and said, hey, let's get together. I want to take you to the Holocaust Museum, and I want you to take me to the African American Museum. And then let's have lunch and have the hard conversation. All too often, I think we stop at the, let me take you to the Holocaust Museum. And we forget to sometimes learn the other story as well, and then talk about it together. Talk about our shared communities, our shared struggles, and our struggling with each other, and have the hard conversation. That's really what this is all preparing you for, is I do believe at the end of the day, it's going to take communication, and it's going to take talking to. And I want to end with this point before we open it up. My Congressman, John Lewis, who is all over this story, a hero of mine who just recently passed, beloved in the Atlanta Jewish community. I mean, you should have seen the outpouring here and nationwide. And I just want to once again say a huge hero of mine. All my summer groups meet with him, and it's fantastic, or met with him, and it was fantastic. It's hard to speak of him in the past. But I was thinking after his funeral, I don't know of anybody that the Atlanta Jewish community feels so singularly strong about like they did John Lewis. And then I started to think, I wonder why that is. And this is just beginning to think in my head, I think it's because he didn't challenge us. He liked us, accepted us, and worked on behalf of us, and didn't really demand anything from us. I do not know if the young Black leadership is going to be that easy on us. I think that they are going to have expectations of us as a community. I think they're going to have demands of us as a community. And I think we're going to have to be prepared to talk with people that might think differently about us, or might challenge our views of Israel, our views of anti-Semitism, and our views of what does it mean to be a marginalized people here, because I don't think many marginalized groups view American Jews as marginalized in this country, and yet we do. we view ourselves as marginalized. And I just want to end,
Unbelievable.
I hope that this sounds hopeful, but my hope is that we become comfortable in our power in this country. We are 2% of this country's population, if even, and yet we are disproportionately, in a good way, I mean this in a good way, in power in this country, in politics, in business, in culture. And if we could become comfortable in that, and I get why we're not, it's in our DNA to always be nervous about what's going on, then we could be maybe more open to engaging with them. And I'll end with Dr. King's quote that he said at Cornell University in 1967, year before he died. He said, people hate each other because they fear each other, and they fear each other because they don't know each other. And they don't know each other because they can't communicate with each other. And they can't communicate with each other because they are separated from each other. May this, as we move into the high holiday season, may this be the year where we stop being, we stop being so separated from each other. And actually, it's interesting to try and do that in a pandemic where we have to be separated, but make even more of an effort to cross over and talk to people who don't look like us, think like us, pray like us, vote like us, love like us. And that's how we'll start to break all this down. And with that, I'll love to hear comments.
Thank you, Billy. I'm going to call on Ray Kale, who's had his hand raised for a while.
I loved your away picture, by the way. So peaceful.
Me?
Yeah, yeah.
I have no idea what it looked like. A
It's
telephone
you
call.
leaning against a rock meditating. on
Oh, yes, yes. Scotland.
it. Oh,
I want to back up to the Black Lives Matter because you brought up a very interesting subject, a separation between the thought of Black Lives Matter and the actual organization that may be pro-Palestinian. So we put a sign on our front lawn that says Black Lives Matter or BLM. Do we worry about someone else coming over and says, why are you concerned about that? They are anti-Jewish and pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel and pro-Palestinian? Or do we say we rise above that and say Black Lives Matter?
so I'll just tell you my thoughts because I've been asked that too. You know, I get asked all the time, how do you support anti-Zionistic, group, anti-Jewish group? First of all, I will just tell you once again, this works for me. I am not 100% accepting of all Zionistic views because that means Yigal Amir's view of Zionism is appropriate. The man who shot Yitzhak Rabin, it's not appropriate to me. There are views that are pro-Zionism by definition that aren't acceptable to me. So, I don't know of many people that are 100% accepting of Zionism. But I will say this. That's a heady answer. My more gut answer is this. Even if they are anti-Semitic, even if they are anti-Israel, and by the way, I don't think most people in the protests in the streets are of that ilk. I think there are probably some, and I think you do hear some things, but I'm not sure that they're tied into the philosophical and political ideology of Black Lives Matter. I think they're out there protesting, and sadly, they've been conflated together there.
I must clarify. I am in that group that says we put Black Lives Matter out there on the lawn because if you ask the vast majority of people out there about what Black Lives Matter is, my belief is that the vast majority of them are not aware of the organization itself that may be anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian, and that we must rise above it and say, listen, we need to look out for them as much as we expect them to look out for us. And I can't be worried about that. There's a higher reasoning out there.
I'm with you. I'm right there with you. That was my answer. Is even if they are that way, human beings are being murdered in our streets without consequences. And that defies my definition of a humane society that I want to live in, and America, what America means to me. And like I said at the beginning, even if it is that, all the more reason to be there so that then I can have a place at the table to call them out on it if need be. But I agree with you that I don't think most of them even understand that that's part of it or that's been conflated. But I agree with you. I will rise above it. And even if, all the better for me to be there, because it would be suspected or expected that I wouldn't be there. So all the more powerful to be there. And then when things calm down, be like, hey, let me just talk to you about this Israel thing or this Jewish thing. And I think that they will be in a place to listen to us more, you know? So I'm with you on that.
Richard Klein?
I was thinking of a poem that's always read on Yom HaShoah. First they came for the socialists, and because I was not a socialist, I did not speak up. So I think we have a responsibility to speak up when we see any kind of problems with any groups that are having. And I think it's our responsibility.
I have nothing to add to that. I agree with you. I'm speaking to you. You are in the choir.
Well said, Richard. Well said. Neil Gross, I saw you posted something for everyone. Did you want to expand on that? No.
I promised Sheila I would keep my mouth shut. You can only help somebody so long until it hurts too much. Friend of a friend is a friend, and an enemy of an enemy is an enemy. I've been on both sides of the issue. Rabbi and I have briefly talked about it. I've been on things that right now I'm thinking about that are not making me real happy. On the black side where they have been wrong. However, it's time to grow up, and it's time to say I'm a Jew and I'm done crossing the line.
Okay.
And I know most of you people don't want to hear that.
Look, this is America. This is what's great about America is we can have this conversation. It takes all sides. It takes all people, all thoughts, and I appreciate your thoughts.
And I want to add one other thing. Where I live now, it's a real melting pot. I'm out in the middle of the desert in the Midwest, the far west. Town has a lot of Asians, blacks, whites, Jews, non-Jews. And the arguments that I hear, particularly from a neighbor of mine who was very black, and I won't use the words he uses, but I hate them because they're bringing me down. So it all goes back to education.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that education is it. And but I'm also looking at this comment because whenever I say education is it, I think about, really, I was talking to somebody earlier today. We talk about racism. Now the phrase is anti-racism. To me, the real talk is about systemic racism. If we want to create change, it's people who are doing the work, who are engaged with these conversations, who are engaged in trying to change America. We might not even understand how deep and baked into America these systems are. So even schools, that is tied into property tax already sets up an unequal access. And so it's fascinating about the primary thing. Neil, I will say this and agree with you. I would be much more of a libertarian if I understood that every kid got equal education and access to that education. Then I would say, okay.
Jewish family take kids out of the regular school system and put them in Jewish schools or other private schools. And the reason is because the public schools are not doing the job that they're being paid to do.
Mm-hmm. So some would also argue they're not getting the money to do it either.
Well, I'm arguing they're getting more money than what they deserve because they're not doing their job, because you can educate a kid in a Catholic school or a Jewish school for a hell of a lot less more money and we're paying to educate a kid in Philadelphia who might be able to read at the 4th grade level. And I'm not talking about Central High School or the old girls' high school.
Mhm.
I'm talking the normal,
Yeah.
the Hamilton school that I went to at 56 at Pine.
I think we agree that education needs to be reconsidered in this country and thought through and handled in a much better way.
Neil, with your permission, I want to share another question that was posted in the chat. Jason Radine wrote, Jews who carried Star of David rainbow flags at LGBTQ rallies in DC and Chicago ran into problems. How do you advise the Jews be present openly as Jews when our historic symbol causes rejection and expulsion from social movements?
Right. So, Jason, you're hitting upon a nerve of mine right now, is that our era of political correctness and the cancel culture, as now it's also being called, makes it very hard, makes it incredibly hard. And the only thing I can say about what you're specifically referring to is the sad part is it's such a small part that is so loud and so loud at pushing back. So it's almost like in our Jewish community of you have kosher, then you have glatt kosher, and then are you kosher enough for this? That's what's happening on the far left of the words, of speech, of the cancel culture. Is a friend of mine called it, the phrase that's going around is woke. He calls it the woke Olympics, that each person is trying to out liberal the other one. And so eventually you're not even dealing with the problem anymore. You're just trying. So that was really unsettling to me, what you were talking about, what you're referring to, the LGBTQ rallies, where, when the Star of David is seen, it's equated to Israel's oppression of Palestinians. And sort of like what we were talking about with our view of the Black community and the Black Lives Matter community, is could people look at the Jewish Star and be like, well, okay, I may disagree with this part of what policy could be or what I understand policy to be, but I appreciate that they're here, and we're not having that conversation, unfortunately. It's to the far left, it's all or nothing. And I think that is sadly the price you pay when you have young, idealistic people out there who see it as all or nothing, a binary choice there. So, I'm with you. I really don't have advice except to keep showing up. Keep showing up. I mean, I just don't think that was a valid reason not to not show up or to leave or to be kicked out, really, of it. So,
Thanks, Billy. Ken Moskowitz has his hand raised, but before, Ken, because you asked the question before we get to that, will be next. I just wanted to add that, Billy, I'm not sure if I had mentioned this to you in advance of our conversation tonight, but I have reached out, our synagogue, thanks to Ray Gill, has reached out to the Salem Baptist Church in our area, Black church, in the hopes of creating a dialogue and a relationship between the two communities. And fortunately, the pastor of that church is very receptive, but we've had a tough time getting a date onto the calendar. It looks like it'll be at the beginning of September. We just haven't been able to finalize it yet. And in advance of that conversation, I have my concerns about how members of his church are going to feel about us reaching out to them and saying, well, we want to support you. It would be nice to think that because there is a legacy of Jewish support for Blacks in this country going back to the Civil Rights era, that this would be something received with open arms. But what you made us aware of when you were recounting the history of Selma and the Civil Rights Movement is that Jews haven't always been on the right side of this. Then we may, in our own minds, play this up more than we should to our benefit, to suggest that we have done more than we really deserve credit for. And so we shouldn't really bring that into any kind of conversation, or with it. We shouldn't come in to a conversation with Blacks Today with an expectation that because we're Jewish, we can say, and we were with you back in the civil rights era. So now we want to continue the struggle.
Yeah. Adam Rabbi Wolberg, if I could
Either
just
way.
add in there for a second, is just, I don't know if you were asking, but I get calls from your colleagues all the time who are in the process of doing this. And one I would say is, it's great y'all are doing it. It'll be even better the next time we're having a racial split in this country, because if you're doing the work now, it's a little late to the game, but for the next time, you're right there. In that this shouldn't just be a Martin. I advise them, don't just have a Martin Luther King Day dinner or program together. The relationships really need to be just beyond talking as Blacks and Jews, but really, can it be, it's just people hanging out, and that's when the conversations are going to happen, is when you're doing something else. Go to when you can go to sports, go to a Phillies game, go to an Eagles game, God forbid, go to a Philadelphia sporting event. You know, it's a non-Philadelphia fan, but go support those teams. Go do something that's not about you being Jewish and them being Black, right? Focus on something else. Do a project together that puts a level playing field, because all too often, and nowhere am I saying that this would be your synagogue doing this, but many times with the best of intentions, we still show up with still this white savior complex. And that, you know, it so needs to be much more of a level playing field of, we want to learn from them and they learn from us, instead of, we want to help you. Let's just be together.
Can we help each other, not help you?
There,
All right.
Perfect.
May I jump in here for a moment? Because I chair the committee at Temple Sinai that does that. And it was my connection with a member of the Salem Baptist Church that initiated all of this. And that I don't think, I mean, it's good to be aware, but I don't see that as the challenge that we're going to be facing, because I had an extensive conversation with a member of the church who put me in touch, or gave me the information to be in touch with Pastor Mitchell. And the rabbi and I are working together on this to try and bring this to fruition. But the Salem Baptist Church is not the first church, and it was a connection through the irresponsibility of people out there in not respecting religious differences. And when I initially spoke with Rabbi Wolberg about the starting of this committee, one of the things he said, I'd also like to bring in Baptist churches. And I said, you know, fine. And we started with the church right down the street from us. It's a Methodist church, not a Baptist church. But now we're working, and unfortunately, COVID-19 interrupted everything.
Sure.
And so and there may be members of my committee that are on here right now. I can't tell. But the point being is, what you said is right spot on to what we are attempting to do. And the object is to meet, to learn about them. And we're making that perfectly clear, to sit, to learn about them, and then invite them to our congregation to learn about us. We did that very well with the Methodist Church. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we had to interrupt them coming to us, but it was a good beginning. And right now, but that's what we are doing. We have a committee to do that, share that committee. There are wonderful people on it. And the rabbis of our congregation are very much behind it. But I just wanted to bring that up.
Yep.
It's being done, or at least we're trying to.
All power to you.
Thanks, Ray. Thank you. I want to go back to Ken Moskowitz because I told him I would give another chance.
I have 3 different points, and I'll end with a point of hope, which is the conversation between Sinai and Salem. The first point is that, Ray, it's not maybe regarding Black Lives Matter, the organization, if one reads the Global Black Lives website or the organizational document, the Movement for Black Lives, you will see anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, intersectionality in those documents. And there is a conflation between the organization which was started after Trevor Martin and its popularity today because it's branded with a great brand. And that is an issue that cannot be overlooked if one goes beyond the veneer of the brand. And that has to be addressed. There is systematic racism in the country, but it's seen, as was alluded to earlier, in our school system. And it's not necessarily money, because you can go to very good schools and be illiterate and go to bad schools and still come out. Look at the examples of the millionaires that went back to elementary schools, promised the education to pay for it all, and how many of those kids did not end up going to school and ended up in jail or dying or on drugs and the rest. So it's a much more complex issue, but education and the school system is systematic racism in this country. There is not a single high school student in Baltimore that tests at their level in math. Not one of 13 high schools.
Yeah, I would also add, Ken,
All this is negative, and I don't want to take time. It's your thing, Billy. So I want to end with a piece of hope of the three. For Salem and for Sinai, as Rabbi Wolber knows, I'm very friendly. I belong to Beth Or and not Sinai. Beth Or moved first to Springhouse and now Maple Glen around the same time that Sinai moved from Mount Airy. Both moved from Mount Airy to different sections of Eastern Montgomery County. When Beth Or moved, their immediate neighbor, like Sinai and the Methodist, I guess Chelton, we were greeted by Bethlehem Baptist Church in 1985. When Rabbi Marks came, Reverend Kwan and Rabbi Marks began a relationship, and this is my advice for Rabbi Wolber, for Adam. They formed a relationship that 2 or 3 years later enveloped the congregation. And that's when we as a congregation went down to the Holocaust Museum, to the African American History Museum wasn't there, but to Franklin Douglas's house. And there is a wax museum in Baltimore that depicts the slave experience from Africa, and particularly the Middle Passage, through the worst of the plantations.
Right.
And it starts at the top with a relationship before you can democratize to the group. And then one last thing on schools and what's going on, the systematic racism of the country. I don't mean to, I should have thought of this before, but post-Civil War, the marriage rate of who had been slaves was equal to the marriage rate of the non-slave community, white community in the United States. There have been things done in the liberal era which were destructive and systematically destroyed the Black community that must be addressed. And we must admit that liberalism has hurt Blacks. But that, I should have mentioned earlier, the important thing is Salem and Sinai, and to build the relationship between the pastor and the rabbi, and as advice from Beth Or. And we now have a 30-year relationship with them. and have been with each other and have shared things with them.
Great. I know we're coming to an end. I just want to throw in there the you were mentioning the systemic racism built into schools, and then some of them then go to prison. You can't talk about systemic racism without talking about the prison system in America today is built to do exactly that idea. If 1 in 3 Black men born after 2000 is projected to do time in prison, you cannot underestimate what that does to a society, to a community. And then also the talking across and the idea of talking with the people who may have in their platform anti-Semitism or anti-Zionistic ideas. It's not his quote, but Moshe Dayan was fond of saying, you don't make peace with your friends. You make it with people you don't agree with. And therefore,
It's got to be two ways. And if you read the origins of Black Lives Matter, and you
all right, we just fundamentally disagree on this idea.
and the other two women who founded it,
okay,
they are not people that one can extend as friends. They do not talk about Black lives. They talk about being trained Marxists. I am quoting them. Patricia Kohlers and Alicia Garcia. And one can only make peace with their enemy, but your enemy has to make peace with you. We see that with Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you, thank you. Okay, I see another comment from Jason. This was not looking for a response, is it? No, okay. Jason posted, not all members of any social movement agree with or even aware of all principles, quote unquote, officially held by that movement. And I think that much was acknowledged earlier. So thank you for highlighting that. Appreciate it, Jason. I want to again thank everyone for joining us tonight, and a special thanks to Billy Planer for making the time to be with us.
Thank you all. This is great.
Your take on history and your ability to share it with us in a really remarkable fashion was just fascinating. And I believe we all learned a lot. I certainly can say for myself, I learned a great deal from your presentation, and it has made me hungry to come down and participate in one of your ECAR 36 journeys to visit places and to have you guide us through and to meet some of these people that you've spoken about, I think would be just marvelous. So God willing, the pandemic will end soon. B'mehera b'yameinu, as we say. Yeah. And we'll be able to schedule an opportunity like that to be with you down in Atlanta and other parts of the South.
I look forward to it. Thank you all so much. Ezra, way to show up right now. So
let's get Billy on the record. Who is his favorite employee ever? Where he goes.
That was Lee's
favorite employee
and putting it together. So
it was me.
Not employer. Well, his favorite employer and employee are on
me.
this call, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I want to give honor to Father Rabbi Wolberg and Mom too for you should be very proud, but also I grew from y'all too. So thank y'all so much. It was great being with y'all, and we'll see you further down the road. It'll be great.
We wish you good health. Good health.
All right.
Lots of success. Thanks, Billy.
Thanks, Billy.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Good night.
Be well.